The opening game between the Pacers and the Knicks in the Eastern Conference semifinals was an interesting one to say the least. The intensity harkened back to the 90s when these two teams used to clash regularly during this point of the season. But it was the referees who unfortunately took center stage far too often. So let's take a deep dive into a bunch of plays, both with the whistle and without, to see if one team in particular benefited more than the other. Let's start with this one at the end of the game, since it was the most crucial part, and you could argue this call decided it. Down one, the Pacers bring it up and try to force a switch of Hartenstein onto Halliburton. Now, Donte DiVincenzo goes down hard. Is there a collision? Absolutely. The rule states a screener must give a moving opponent enough of an opportunity to avoid contact, 1 to 2 steps depending on how fast DiVincenzo is going before contact. So, technically, this is a foul. However, there are over 100 screens set each game, and this type of contact isn't called the foul that often.
After review, it's determined that Turner does not give his opponent time to stop or change direction on this screen. Therefore, it's an unsuccessful challenge and an illegal screen on Turner. Ruling on the floor stands.
In fact, we only need to go back 40 seconds to see a much worse screen set by DiVincenzo near half court that was not called. Sadly for the Pacers, the refs also called this a kicked ball, which it clearly was not. So instead of a 4-on-2 fast break of a tie game, the Knicks get the ball back. Heck, let's look at the first play of the game. Does Hartenstein give Nembhard enough room before creating contact on this pin down? Does he continue to move in Nembhard's path? I'm not showing this to say it should be a foul, rather to question why this call was made in such a crucial moment. The referees never want to be part of why a team wins or loses, and while this is technically the correct call, I don't think it's the right one. So many people want to point to having too wide of a base on the screen that it should be an automatic foul call, but there still needs to be enough contact. So why wasn't there a whistle on this OG ball screen? Those feet are clearly outside his cylinder, there is contact with his leg on the defender, and it gave Brunson enough of an advantage coming around that he can get into his step back game from the free throw line and cut the lead to 3. Another key point I want you to understand is that NBA referees are constantly assessing the severity of a foul, its impact on the possession, and whether enough of an advantage was gained to merit a whistle. It's precisely why you'll see numerous plays throughout a game that could look like a foul but aren't called because no advantage was gained, and following the absolute letter of the law would lead to a game with more stoppages for fouls than baskets combined by both teams. Isaiah Hartenstein is a particularly difficult player to referee, since it's basically his job to push the boundaries of what the refs will accept as legal contact. His hip check screens can be seen as both infuriating but also effective at the same time. Remember, screening is not like being an offensive lineman prior to the snap. You don't have to be totally set and still before the contact happens. Fans will get mad at screens even when there simply isn't enough contact to merit a whistle. You can find plays around the basket jockeying for rebounds in this game where he'll provocatively use his limbs to clear space and grab the ball, pulling at the jersey subtly, hoping the refs don't see it. Sometimes he's not subtle enough and the refs are forced to call it, or else see too big of an advantage to the Knicks. And with 6 fouls to play with, the risk is definitely worth the reward if the referees deem enough contact has been made. You can pick any possession at random, and I bet you'd find examples like this two-handed shove to get open that everyone is okay with as part of the normal physicality of the game. For the Pacers, Miles Turner is a notorious grabber. Check how he's grabbing Hartenstein's arm to prevent him from helping and closing out to the corner. This is so commonplace that no one blinks an eye. Here's a screen that's very similar to the one they called on him at the end of the game. The difference, DiVincenzo doesn't fall to the floor. So you can see why it's confusing to everyone when the ref decides to make this a penalty. There were plenty of screens set that were questionable in this game. Hart slides over late to get in the path, making knee-to-knee contact that almost takes TJ McConnell out of the game. Does Precious give Siakam a step to avoid the contact? Or does he just move right up to his side illegally? And then OG is allowed to lower his shoulder into his man, who clamps down on it before then contesting the shot with nary a whistle to be called. May I interest you in an OG screen where he runs right up on Brunson's man and delivers a little shot. Again, no call is made in the middle of the second quarter. But then, midway through the third, DiVincenzo goes to set a screen that had been legal all game long, only to discover suddenly it's not. The defender is stationary, so you're allowed to be closer than the 1 to 2 step buffer in the rules for a progressing defender. Does he drop down and then drift slightly towards the defender? Maybe, but this is not the call to make in a tough physical playoff game. One way to get away with some stuff is to commit the foul in a scrum of players, as Deuce McBride does with his hit check brush screen that lifts Siakam off his feet, but gets no special attention from the refs. And then you have guys willing to take a dive and see if maybe they can get a whistle that way. You'd need a while to convince me that this contact to Brunson would have made him fall back that hard, and yet it worked as the refs penalized Toppin. I'm sure Nesmith was thinking the same thing down the stretch and even throws up his hands on the way down to make sure the refs saw him flop, and in the name of consistency, at least they called this one too. Big guys can now get away with subtle things in order to get stops. So either the refs just missed this subtle push of Hart out of bounds, or there wasn't much of an advantage gained with the successful pass to OG, so they simply let it go. It could also be unfair as a big man when the refs allow a lot more contact on them than they do on smaller players. Check how Brunson clamps down on Turner's arm, trying to prevent him from catching the ball, then whacking him on the arm, and Turner just ignores it to lay it in without even a peep to the refs. The elephant in the room is that the league clearly changed how they wanted their games called right after the All-Star break. Suddenly, way more contact was being allowed in the paint, basically turning the last half of the regular season into the playoffs. Contact like this from Turner was an instant foul earlier in the season. Now, it's a play on, which tells the players if they want to venture into the lane, they better bring the flex. No zone. Which is what Josh Hart found out after grabbing his own miss and getting a hit on the shoulder and side of the head while shooting this layup, but no whistle blew. To balance that out, DiVincenzo gets away with clear contact to the head on this block from behind, which would be legal if he touched the ball first, but I just don't see it that way. What gets frustrating is when the refs just get the calls wrong. It's truly remarkable how many calls they do end up getting right throughout the course of the game, but this block by Nesmith looks clean to me, especially with the replay. However, here's a new one. Zach Zarba blows the whistle on this Brunson block attempt of Turner's layup. The Knicks challenge it thinking it was clean, and they win the challenge and rescind the foul because Zarba said it was marginal contact after he blocked the ball.
After review, it's been determined that Brunson was able to make legal contact with the basketball. Any contact after was deemed marginal. Due to the imminent possession gained by New York, it will be New York basketball out of bounds. Successful challenge.
But watch these replays. It looks clear to me that Brunson did make contact with the body just before the ball, and the amount of contact can't be considered marginal, can it? Luckily, both teams were able to win challenges to overturn calls the refs got wrong. This is definitely the system working, even if it does cost a timeout if the successful challenge was a team's second challenge of the game. But I can't shake the feeling that the Knicks ended up benefiting a little more from the way the game was called. And while they were at home and that might be expected, let's hope the rest of the series can be better than this one.